Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So my goal in my sermon is somewhat lofty. I want you to be convinced of the reality of the demonic before we leave today. That's what I want to talk about this morning. So some of you just now gave me a look. There's just no other way to preach this text than to actually dive in and deal with what has gone on in this story with this fellow who comes to Jesus just as Jesus' foot steps onto the sand out of the boat. He doesn't even get a chance to, rest or stretch, and there is someone who approaches Jesus, hollering and carrying on. Jesus, what have you to do with us? Don't torment me. Jesus has an encounter with someone who is described in the text as having demons. So we need to deal with that. We need to talk about that. And I'm going to try to convince you that this is a real thing. Now, before you freak clear out, I want to say two things. One is that I personally believe in forces that are against God's purposes. And I see them too often to not believe that to be true. So if you want to talk further about it, please come find me. We can have all kinds of conversation about that. But I want to take seriously because there's some very rich lessons to be learned from this encounter with Jesus. And I want to unpack it. And in order to do that, you need to go with me. And just for the sake of, if you're skeptical about these things, just for the sake of the moment, understand that something is influencing this individual, and it's quite profound. So we hear about him, we learn some things about him. He is seized by this demon, whatever it is, and he is often chained and shackled. So that tells us that the people who know this fellow, they're used to him being this way, right? They're used to him having, what are we going to call it, a fit? Anyway, he needs to be controlled. He needs to be managed. And they manage him. And it's almost a kind of kindness, in a way. We don't want him to hurt himself. We'll chain him up. We'll. The thing is, the demons, he breaks free of that, and then he has no recourse but then to live. It describes him living in the tombs. Now, doesn't that just strike you as really sad? I mean, if you have no other recourse, no other place where you can be comfortable than to hang out in the cemetery, you are living, but you are living among the dead. You are living, but you're not really living. You don't go to the cemetery to live. Nobody camps at the cemetery. They're nice parks. I suppose you could. But we don't do that. So this individual is deeply, deeply disturbed. And we don't really know by what. But I'm going to suggest to you that the description of it being demonic is correct in that this man has been robbed of his life. He's been robbed of the abundance of life. If your only recourse is to live among the dead, you have been robbed of your life. And I want to suggest to you that it might not be as unfamiliar to you as you might think. This is the part that might kind of step on your toes a little bit. Because you probably encountered forces of the demonic yourself. Here's what they sound like. Here's what they look like. They're like voices inside of you that say things like, you're not enough. You're not smart enough. You're not thin enough. You're not educated enough. You've not worked hard enough. You're ugly. You're stupid. You always make mistakes. Anybody ever hear those? Yeah. And what do they do? Is that uplifting? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel strong? And no, they rob you of life. So I want to suggest to you that none of that is from God. God does not look upon each of us and say, you're not enough. In fact, God looks upon you and says, you are beloved, and you are mine. So I want you to understand the demonic in the perhaps broadest terms of all is that anything that robs you of an abundant life, the life that you were meant to live from the creation and foundation of the world, is not from God. Those lies that we listen to, that we internalize into ourselves, they rob us of life. And they are so prevalent. Do you know the incidence right now of eating disorders among teenage girls? Do you know what that's about? I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. Drug abuse. I have to believe there's a sense in which I will numb myself of the reality so I don't have to listen to my internal dialogue that's already told me I'm not enough. It's rampant. These ways in which we listen to lies about ourselves, we are chained and shackled just as surely as this man in this story is. And I don't know how else to name that other than calling that demonic. You've seen teenage kids cutting on themselves because they're trying to feel something. I mean, we get caught up in this. All of us do. If you've been told all your life that you never measure up, the lies that we believe rob us. So we see in this story, whatever it is that this man is experiencing, and it is legion. By the way, how much is a legion?
100.
What did you say? Many, yes. Nobody knows?
100 or 1,000?
I heard it was 1,000.
1,000.
You've been in the military. You should know that. What's a legion? A legion is a whole heck of a lot. All right? So this isn't just one kind of oppression affecting this man. It's a bunch. Now, I want to suggest to you the next wonderful part of this story is that Jesus heals him. Out of here. He's mine. You be gone. Let him go. Jesus, in this story, is what God, who is the God of life, always is. When God, who has created, comes against that which is death-dealing, the death-dealing demons always tremble and flee. Always. I mean, it happens a lot throughout the Gospels. We don't like to talk about it because we have images, I suppose, in our mind of churches in which they practice deliverance, where they'll smack you on the head and, get out of there, which isn't a bad thing to do, I suppose. I probably am not going to smack you in your face and say, demon, be out of there. But praying and asking God to show us the lies that we listen to and to help us to not embrace them, right? To practice, in a sense, deliverance and liberation. And you probably don't think of it this way, but so much of discipleship is in your mind. It's casting down thoughts that are just wrong. They're lies. They're lies that say one human being is more important than another human being, or one is worthy and one is not. That's a lie. We know that in the gospel. That's a lie. And this is a great example of it. Jesus is in the land of the Gerasenes. Across from Galilee, it's a Gentile land. It's not his own people. He's gone to the far side. And he's there among people who his people have been taught to hate, or at least avoid. They're Gentiles. Stay away from them. They're not of us. And Jesus steps right out to that shore, and bam, first thing he does is liberate someone from a demonic oppression. As if to say, well, you're my people too. And that's part of Luke's mission, is to remind us that God does not play that favorite game. That everybody is God's favorite. Mark, did you know that? You are God's favorite. God looks at you and says, oh, I am so fond of him. And Jeff, he's like, I got Jeff's picture on my refrigerator. This is what God does. This is how we know who God is. So why do we listen to the lie? This is a powerful story right here. This isn't even a parable. It's something that actually, we understand it. Jesus isn't teaching a parable. He's actually actively healing somebody. So the demons, they don't, go easily in this moment. They ask to be, don't send us to the abyss, send us into the pigs. Now we got to stop there because we got to talk about pigs. Pigs, well, in Judaism, pigs are a profane animal. And they're being kept over on the other shore. They keep pigs over there. So what do we think about those people? Because they keep those pigs, right? If the pigs are profane, what do we think about the people? That they're profane too, right? So it's this interesting example where Jesus steps out and they want to be in the pigs. He says, go into the pigs. The pigs go off the cliff. I imagine that they're squealing because that's what pigs do. And off they go in a frenzy and they drown. And presumably the way the story, is told, you don't know, but you think that they're gone. It's a kind of abyss, right? They go into the drink. All right. And the man is freed, and the text describes him as finally putting on some clothes. He's clothed. It's just an incredible image of dignity. And it says he's in his right mind. It's just a beautiful image, clothed and in his right mind. But look at what happens. The swineherds weren't that happy that their piggies went over the cliff. Especially if they're making their living by these pigs. And so they run off and tell everybody. And it sounds like a crowd gathers. And they see the man whom they used to chain him up. They used to manage him. Wait a minute now. He's clothed and in his right mind. And the text says, and they were afraid. Now, I want to submit to you, there's a question here in my mind about who actually is oppressed. Is it not also the townspeople who are so used to this individual that being controlled? They had a certain kind of control over him, and now he's dressed and in his right mind. They don't know what to do. They're afraid. They care more about the pigs going over the cliff than this brother of theirs who is now free of this oppression. Isn't that kind of sick? They cannot rejoice in the liberation of this man. Here he is sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and their response is fear. Is that from God? I suggest to you that there's a lot more deliverance that could happen here, except what happens next in the story. They say, Jesus, you need to leave. You're upset in too many things. You're rocking the boat way too much here. We can't have this going on. And Jesus leaves. He's not going to stay where he's not wanted. Isn't that a powerful thing to think about? It's like a mirror. It's not just this fellow who is legion, who is filled with all kinds of demonic spirit. I think it's probably the city too. And really, isn't this a story about most human beings? The ways in which we build these little constructs in our minds about, well, this is a person that I can relate to, and that's fine, but that's a person I don't relate to. Where Jesus just steps right into the middle of it and says, that's not the way of God. God is liberation. I love you all. And yeah, some of us, that's a very fearful thing. It means we have to change. It is. It's what liberation might mean. Another person's freedom might be really terrifying to us. But God is portrayed in this. And Jesus is his ministry, He is the author of life itself. And when he shows up, he's about bringing abundant life. Remember the words in the Gospel of John, the thief comes only to kill and to steal and destroy, but I have come to bring life and to bring abundant life. That's God's calling card. So wherever there is the demonic to be found, when God comes up against that, there's liberation, there is freedom, including in the gospel, if you read all the way to the end, the resurrection from the dead. Death itself doesn't even have power. God is cool. And here the townspeople are worrying about their pigs. I feel like this is such a powerful example for us to take into ourselves and ask ourselves, what do I need to be liberated from? What are the demons, what are the lies that I listen to that rob me of my life? Because we all listen to them. All of us, we do. I mean, it's just the truth. Anything that you have internalized in your soul that has told you that you are not a worthy human being or worthy of God's love and forgiveness, and that God somehow looks on you with disappointment, you just jettison all that. That is not who God is. God is a God of life and a God of love. And even this fellow who's got a legion of demonic forces in his soul, he gets freed from it. And if there was anybody in the story who was not worthy of it, it'd be this guy, right? Because he's from that other side. We don't care what happens to those people. They eat pigs anyway. Jesus is radical, I'm telling you. He steps out of the boat and onto the shore, and it messes everything up. Everything gets messed up. All those boundaries and all those lies that we told ourselves suddenly discover, wow, I'm actually lovable. God could forgive even me. So I have two questions for you. Two questions for you to wrestle with. One, what do you need to be liberated from? What do you need to be liberated from? It's okay to ask God to free you. God wants us to be free and whole. So sit with that yourselves. The other is, I want you to be like this man. Jesus sends him home and says, go tell everybody what God has done for you. Okay, that may be scarier than having a private little prayer about being liberated, I know. But it's interesting to me that Jesus doesn't just say, yeah, you come along with my band. He sends him out now as a missionary. Go and tell what God has done. He doesn't say, go make up something that God has done, or go, fabricate a nice story or anything. Just be honest. Tell your story. This is what God's done for me. This is how I know he's holy. This is how I know God's real. This is how I know I'm loved. And you're loved too. You can do that. It's a little evangelism thing. But I bet you have it in you. Because I know that I've had talked with all of you. I know that God is at work in us and through us and for us. I know. God's working in me. I certainly know that. You just tell someone. You got 7 days. You have a sphere of influence around your life, where you live and your work and the relationships you have. There's probably one person that will come along your path in the next 7 days, and you can say, you know what, I just want to tell you what God has done for me. I just want to tell you about that. And it'll be okay, I promise. They might even be interested. Or maybe not. But it's good for you to do. Just tell of how awesome God is. God is the liberator. God is the deliverer, we say. When Jesus shows up and steps out of the boat, that which is dead is raised up to new life. This story is a resurrection story. It's a resurrection story. Everybody wrote this guy off. He lives in the tombs. He's nobody we have to fool with because, he's off over there. And Jesus, in his wonderful way, breathes new life into this man and then calls everybody else to new life as well. And that's our story. That's yours and my story. That's wonderful. God is awesome. And say a little prayer for the piggies. Amen.